You think it's just about getting older, but it's not. These 5 intimacy mistakes aren't caused by time, they're caused by silent shame and what no one ever taught you about staying connected as a man over 60. And by the time most men realize it, it's too late. No one told you how lonely a body can feel when it hasn't been touched not medically but meaningfully. No one explained how the quiet absence of intimacy slowly becomes a weight you carry everywhere in your posture, your tone of voice, your memory, your blood pressure. You may have blamed it on stress, on aging, on your partner losing interest. But if you're honest, there's a deeper truth you've never said out loud: you miss being close. Not just for sex, for the feeling of being wanted, for the sense of being alive in your own skin. And if you've gone months or even years without true intimacy, your body knows. It may not scream, but it whispers in ways you can't ignore: the tiredness, the restlessness, the shallow sleep, the way your mind drifts in conversation. You're not broken, but you've forgotten how vital that part of you is. And the biggest mistake men over 60 make, believing that forgetting it is normal. Let's talk about the first mistake, the one most men don't realize they're making until it's too late: believing intimacy only means sex. You were raised to think in terms of performance, of virility, of proving something. But after 60, the body begins to speak a different language. Slower, softer, wiser. The problem isn't that intimacy fades, it's that the definition never evolved. And because you equated connection with function, when the function changed, you assumed connection had to end too. But that's the lie. Real intimacy isn't about performance. It's about presence. It's about showing up emotionally, physically, spiritually, even when the body changes, especially when it changes. Men who cling to the old model often retreat in silence when their performance slips. They stop initiating, stop asking, stop touching, stop talking. And that silence doesn't just hurt their partners, it builds a wall around their own hearts. They feel the loss, but can't name it. So they distract themselves. They bury it under hobbies, news, yard work, or scrolling. But deep down, something aches: the hunger to be seen, not just needed. The second mistake: thinking your partner just lost interest. Maybe she did. Maybe the years, the stress, the health scares, the emotional drift. Maybe they made intimacy less frequent. But blaming her without owning your part is a shortcut to resentment. And that resentment is poison. It shows up in the way you sigh, in the words you don't say, in the way you avoid eye contact or reach for the TV remote instead of her hand. But here's the truth most men never hear. Women don't stop wanting connection. They stop wanting pressure. They stop responding to obligation. They stop engaging when they feel unseen or uncherished. You may think you're being rejected, but what she may be feeling is forgotten. Men over 60 who regret their intimacy patterns often realize too late that their partner wasn't disinterested, she was waiting. Waiting for gentleness, for compliments, for non-sexual touch, for the sense that intimacy is about connection, not performance. And when that never came, she shut down, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Let's pause and look at what happens biologically when intimacy disappears. For men over 60, sexual activity doesn't just influence mood or relationship, it affects hormones, sleep quality, cardiovascular health, and even immune strength. Testosterone levels, already declining with age, drop more sharply without stimulation. That doesn't just affect libido, it affects energy, bone density, mental sharpness, and even depression risk. Men who maintain affectionate and intimate touch, whether through partnered intimacy or self-care, often report better cognitive clarity, lower blood pressure, and deeper emotional stability. But when intimacy disappears, the brain and body register that absence. Slowly, yes, but unmistakably. You begin to forget the sound of your own laughter. You get used to being numb. And that numbness, it's not strength, it's a signal. Which leads us to the third mistake: staying silent. About your fears, about your longings, about your frustration, your shame, your fading confidence. Silence, especially for men, is often confused with stoicism. But in intimacy, silence is corrosion. The things you don't say build walls. They create distance. And the longer you go without speaking openly about what's happening in your body and your heart, the harder it becomes to bridge that gap. Some men go 5, 10, even 20 years without having a real conversation about sex with their partners. They joke, they hint, they avoid, And meanwhile, their relationships shrink from connection into cohabitation. But here's what no one tells you. You can come back from that. You can have awkward, honest conversations. You can say, I miss us, or I feel afraid, or can we talk about this? And that moment of courage, just one, can open a door that's been locked for years. Now here's where things get uncomfortable because the fourth mistake is subtle, but it leaves deep scars, failing to reimagine what intimacy can look like. After 60, sex may look different. It may move slower. It may require new tools, new medications, new understandings. But instead of adapting, many men retreat. They grieve what's changed, but never build what could be. They assume the only kind of intimacy that mattered is gone. And they miss the opportunity to create something deeper, softer, richer. Something that isn't about being hard, but about being open. About rediscovering sensuality, humor, creativity, laughter, and trust. Men who avoid this path often look back with regret, not because their bodies changed, but because they never allowed their minds to grow beyond a teenage definition of sex. And the fifth mistake, it's the most painful one, believing you're no longer desirable. After decades of being defined by what you do, how strong you are, how reliable or virile or capable, you hit a point where you no longer feel seen that way. And instead of rewriting the story, you quietly accept the erasure. But let me say this plainly, you are still desirable, not because of your body, but because of your presence, because of your wisdom, because of the way you listen, the way you laugh, the way you care. Your partner is not waiting for the man you used to be. She's waiting for the man who's willing to show up now, vulnerably, honestly, fully. You may not realize how much power lives in a single conversation until you have the one you've been avoiding for years. And that's where the road to healing begins. Because for men over 60, the damage isn't just in what was lost. It's in what was never spoken, what was swallowed, what was silently tolerated until numbness became routine. But here's the secret that almost no one tells you. Even decades of distance can be bridged in a moment of honest presence. And even if the spark feels dead, the embers are usually still there, just waiting for air. Think about this. When was the last time you touched someone with full attention? Not mechanically, not out of routine, but with intention, the way you might hold a child's hand or run your palm across old wood, appreciating every groove. Most men don't slow down enough to touch that way, not because they can't, but because somewhere along the line they forgot that their touch is sacred. They started believing that if they weren't strong, hard, fast, or dominant, their touch no longer mattered. And so they pulled back. But here's the truth, after 60, your touch may be the most valuable thing you have left. Not because of what it leads to, but because of what it means. To touch someone with slowness, with presence, with zero agenda, that is healing. That is memory. That is love in its highest form. And that is what you still carry in your hands, whether you know it or not. Let's take a deeper look at how these intimacy mistakes silently affect your health, and not in some abstract theoretical way, but in your daily life. Studies show that men in their 60s and 70s who remain physically and emotionally connected to their partners have lower resting heart rates, stronger immune responses, and fewer markers of inflammation. And that makes perfect sense. Because when your nervous system feels safe, when you feel bonded, held, affirmed, your entire biology responds with healing. Oxytocin increases, cortisol drops, digestion improves, sleep deepens, and yet most men think of intimacy as optional, as something they can do without. But try to go without it for long enough, and what you'll find is not just loneliness. You'll find fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, and a subtle erosion of confidence that has nothing to do with your job, your money, or your body. It has to do with being unseen. And what about memory? You might think you're forgetting names or misplacing keys just because of age. But here's a hidden truth. Memory thrives on emotional engagement. When you share closeness, laughter, eye contact, your brain builds stronger emotional anchors. Without those anchors, the days start to blur. Life becomes repetition, and memory fades not because you're old, but because nothing meaningful has broken the cycle. The antidote isn't a crossword puzzle, it's connection. It's the look in someone's eyes when you reach for them, not to take, but to give. That's what makes the neurons fire. That's what brings the past into the present and the present into clarity. Now let's talk about something most men are afraid to admit, fear of rejection. After 60, your body changes. You may move more slowly. You may need more help to get aroused. You may feel less confident. And because of that, many men stop initiating intimacy, not because they don't want it, but because they're terrified of being turned down. That fear turns into silence. That silence turns into resentment. And that resentment becomes a wall. But what if you name the fear? What if you said, I don't feel confident right now, but I still want to feel close to you? What if you allowed yourself to be seen in your tenderness, not just your strength? The irony is that the very thing you're most afraid to show is often what your partner is most longing to see. Not the bravado, but the real you, the one who still cares, still longs, still aches for connection. Men over 60 often think that intimacy is about what they can do. But what most women want is how you can be. Are you present? Are you affectionate? Are you generous with your attention? Because if your intimacy was built on youthful energy, and now that energy has shifted, you can still offer something far more lasting: emotional safety. And emotional safety, when it exists, becomes the bedrock for any physical closeness that may follow. Let's not pretend that physical barriers aren't real. Erectile dysfunction, prostate issues, heart medication, side effects, all of these can affect your ability to perform. But too many men stop there. They stop trying. They stop learning. They stop adapting. But just like you learn to drive a new kind of car or use new technology, you can learn new ways to be intimate. There are tools, there are therapies, there are approaches that don't rely on old blueprints. There's sensual massage. There's breath work. There are exercises that bring connection through trust, through slowness, through play. But you won't find them if you've already told yourself the story that those days are over. And then comes the loss. Most men won't admit the loss of playfulness. When was the last time you flirted? Not as a tactic, but as an art. When was the last time you laughed in bed, not because something was wrong, but because something was beautifully human? When was the last time you said something with a wink in your voice instead of a sigh? Intimacy thrives on play, on risk, on tiny acts of surprise. But most men stop playing. They become serious, heavy, focused on results, and the joy evaporates. If you want to reclaim intimacy, you must reclaim the part of you that can still play not like a boy, but like a man who has nothing to prove and everything to offer. And here's what happens when men do begin to reconnect. Their health improves, not in dramatic overnight ways, but in thousands of tiny shifts. They sleep better. They stand taller. They speak with more warmth. Their eyes brighten. Their humor returns. They stop chasing youth and start embodying something better: mature intimacy. The kind built not on hormones, but on honesty. The kind that doesn't fade with age, but deepens. This isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering what was never lost, only buried. Under shame, under silence, under outdated definitions. You're not past your prime. You're standing on the edge of your most authentic chapter. All you have to do is take one step forward. So now you know the truth. Intimacy doesn't disappear. After 60, it just changes form. And the men who suffer most in silence are the ones who never learned how to evolve with it. But the ones who choose to grow, to redefine, to lean into discomfort instead of away from it, those are the men who end up rediscovering not only their relationships, but themselves. The third act of your life isn't where the curtain falls. It's where the story deepens. But to truly reclaim intimacy, you have to be willing to shed what no longer works, not just in your body, but in your beliefs. Let's begin here. You have to make space for intimacy to exist. That sounds obvious. But look at your life. How much space have you actually created for real connection? Do you have slow evenings, uninterrupted by screens or obligations? Do you sit at the dinner table with your partner and talk without rushing? Do you touch throughout the day, not sexually, but gently, intentionally? Because if intimacy only happens in the bedroom, then it's not intimacy, it's obligation. And obligation kills desire faster than anything. One of the greatest regrets men over 60 express is not that sex stopped, but that connection faded long before that. And connection fades not from time, but from neglect, from prioritizing everything else, from losing touch, literally and metaphorically. If you want intimacy to thrive, you must become a student of it again. You must ask, not assume. You must be willing to say, teach me who you are today, even to a partner you've known for 40 years. Because people change, bodies change, desires change. And the willingness to explore those changes together is what keeps the flame alive. Men who stay curious about themselves, about their partners, keep discovering new ways to love, to laugh, to express, to feel. But those who close the book, who believe the story has already been told, miss the most meaningful chapters of all. Let's talk about self-intimacy, a phrase most men rarely hear. Because before you can be deeply intimate with someone else, you have to feel safe in your own skin. And many men over 60 don't. They're carrying shame about their bodies, about their past choices, about their lost opportunities. That shame becomes silence. That silence becomes distance. And that distance becomes isolation even inside a marriage. But here's what changes everything: reverence for your own body. You don't have to love every wrinkle, every scar, every slowdown, but you do have to respect what this body has carried you through. You do have to give it kindness, movement, rest, pleasure. You do have to touch it not just for hygiene, but for connection. When was the last time you looked at yourself in the mirror without judgment? When was the last time you put lotion on your skin and thanked your hands, your legs, your chest? When was the last time you breathed deeply and felt gratitude for your own pulse? This may sound simple, but men who do this, who reclaim intimacy with their own bodies, often find that their capacity to give and receive intimacy grows dramatically. Another overlooked key to rekindling connection is ritual, not routine ritual. What's the difference? A routine is something you do without thinking. A ritual is something you do with presence. Lighting a candle before bed, playing a favorite song while slow dancing in the kitchen, reading poetry out loud, taking a walk together every evening, and holding hands. These small acts repeated with intention build the kind of emotional intimacy that sustains physical intimacy. Because connection doesn't appear out of nowhere, it grows in the spaces we consistently protect. Let's be honest, one of the hardest things about aging is feeling like your body is betraying you. You wake up with new aches, you forget things more easily, you move more slowly, and it's tempting to shut down emotionally as your physical confidence wavers. But this is where real intimacy begins, in the willingness to show up even when you feel unsure. Intimacy doesn't demand perfection, it demands presence. You don't need to impress anyone. You need to be real, to be tender, to be willing to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here and I care, and I want to keep learning you. Men often say, I don't know how to bring it up. So let me give you the words, can I share something that's been on my heart? Or I've missed us in a way I don't know how to explain. Or would it be okay if we talked about how we feel lately, not just physically, but emotionally? These aren't perfect scripts, but they open the door. They say I'm willing to walk into the vulnerability that real intimacy requires. Let's not forget the power of listening. Not fixing, not defending, just listening. When your partner talks about her own desires, her own fears, her own hesitations, don't rush to solve it. Just hold it. Hold her. Say, thank you for telling me. That alone builds trust. And trust is the soil where new intimacy can grow even after decades of drought. And if you're alone, if you're widowed, divorced, or never partnered, this message still belongs to you. You are not excluded from intimacy. You can still cultivate it through friendships, through community, through creativity, through self-touch, through meaningful conversation, through art, through service. Intimacy is not just sex. It is the courage to be known. And that courage is available to you regardless of circumstance. Now let's address the final and often unspoken block to intimacy in older men grief. Many of the men who feel disconnected from their partners or from their own bodies are carrying unprocessed grief. Grief over lost years, over health challenges, over missed opportunities, over partners who changed or pulled away, over mistakes they made and don't know how to forgive themselves for. And grief, when left unspoken, calcifies into resignation. But here's the path forward: grieve out loud. Write about it. Speak it. Cry if you need to. Grief is not weakness, it's release. And on the other side of release is the space to feel again. You are not too old to start over. You are not too late to love more deeply. You are not done, not unless you choose to be. Because the truth is, your capacity for intimacy doesn't shrink with age, it expands. It becomes less about performance and more about presence, less about achievement and more about connection, less about doing and more about being. You might think the time to reclaim intimacy has passed, that you're too old, too tired, too far gone. But that voice is not wisdom. It's fear dressed in familiar clothing. And every time you let it speak for you, you lose one more chance to become the man you were always meant to be, not just a provider, not just a protector, but a man who knows how to be present even in silence, even in stillness, even in uncertainty. Because the truth is, this intimacy doesn't demand youth, it demands courage. And courage, my friend, is something you've been practicing your whole life. Every hard decision, every night you stayed up with a sick child, every time you showed up to work when you didn't feel like it, every time you buried pain without a place to put it. That was courage. But now in this chapter of life, courage must take a new shape. It's not about endurance anymore. It's about vulnerability, about letting someone in, not because they need you, but because you need them. And saying those words, admitting that need, that's where the real healing begins. Let's talk about what healing intimacy actually looks like for a man over 60. It doesn't look like Hollywood. It doesn't look like conquest. It doesn't look like a grand gesture or a dramatic confession. It looks like brushing your partner's hair without being asked. It looks like pausing to say, "You look beautiful today," instead of walking by. It looks like setting down your phone and holding her hand while the TV plays in the background. It looks like choosing presence over distraction, kindness over habit, wonder over assumption. And for yourself, it means this: stop speaking to yourself like you are broken. Stop rehearsing the lies that say your best years are behind you. You are not past your prime. You are entering it. Because the prime of a man is not about how hard he can work or how much he can produce. The prime of a man is when he learns how to give without fear, how to feel without apology, how to love without armor. If you're in a relationship that's gone quiet, don't wait for her to be the first to speak. Be the first to reach. Touch her shoulder. Ask her how she's sleeping. Ask her what she misses. And then really listen. Not to defend, not to fix, just to witness. And if she cries, let her cry. If she's angry, let her speak. She's not attacking you. She's telling you where she hurts. And sometimes healing begins not with action, but with acknowledgement. And if you're alone, don't wait for someone to come save you. Be your own beginning. Start by reconnecting to your body. Take yourself on a walk and notice the breeze. Make a meal and savor every bite. Find a song from your youth and dance alone in the kitchen. Call someone you've been meaning to call. Write a letter to someone you never forgave, or to someone you never thanked. All of this is intimacy. All of it is the soil in which love grows, whether with someone else or with yourself. And yes, you may stumble. You may say the wrong thing. You may feel awkward, exposed, unsure. But awkwardness is a sign that you're alive, that you're doing something new, that you're learning again. And what a gift that is, to still be teachable at this stage of life, to still be willing to begin again. Most men never get there, but you can. Let's return to the 5 mistakes for a moment, not to dwell, but to remember. First, believing intimacy only means sex. It doesn't. It means connection. Second, thinking your partner lost interest when in fact she's waiting to be seen again. Third, staying silent instead of speaking the truth about what's been lost and what you long for. Fourth, refusing to reimagine what intimacy can become after 60. And a fifth, the most tragic of all, believing you are no longer desirable. You are. Not because of your body, but because of your heart, your presence, your willingness to stay open. And now the question becomes, what will you do with this awareness? Will you go back to sleep? Go back to silence? Let routine continue to shrink the space where love once lived. Or will you say no more distance, no more assumptions, no more waiting for something to change without participating in the change yourself? Start with one act, one gesture, one truth. That's how fire is reignited, not with a blaze, but with a spark. And here's the beauty of being over 60, you don't have time to waste. And that's a gift. You can no longer afford the games, the pride, the pretending. You can be honest now. You can be soft. You can be bold. You can be kind. You can be real. Because the end of performance is the beginning of freedom. And freedom is where intimacy thrives.